The morning sun cast long shadows across the cobblestone courtyard of Buckingham Palace as Sergeant James Morrison adjusted his red tunic one final time. 23 years of service to the crown had taught him that some days would test every fiber of his training, but nothing could have prepared him for what was about to unfold on this particular Tuesday in March. Princess Anne stepped out of her black Range Rover with the same purposeful stride that had defined her public service for decades. At 73, she remained the hardest-working member of the royal family, and today's schedule was no exception. 3 charity visits, a hospital opening, and an evening gala awaited her attention. Her lady-in-waiting, Sarah Thompson, hurried to keep pace as they approached the palace's main entrance. The Princess Royal had always been different from her siblings. While Charles pondered philosophy and Andrew courted controversy, Anne simply got on with the job. She possessed an almost military precision in her approach to royal duties, a quality that had earned her respect from palace staff and the British public alike. Her no-nonsense attitude and sharp wit had become legendary, but so had her unwavering loyalty to the institution of monarchy. Sergeant Morrison had been assigned to Anne's security detail for the past 5 years, and in that time, he had developed profound respect for her work ethic. Unlike some royals who treated their protection officers as invisible furniture, Anne acknowledged his presence with a brief nod each morning. It was a small gesture, but it spoke volumes about her character. The palace corridors buzzed with their usual morning activity as staff prepared for another busy day. Footmen polished silver, housekeepers arranged fresh flowers, and private secretaries reviewed schedules with military precision. The centuries-old building seemed to pulse with purpose, each person playing their part in maintaining the smooth operation of the monarchy. However, beneath this veneer of calm efficiency, tensions had been simmering for months. Queen Camilla's elevation from consort to queen had not been without its challenges. While the public had largely accepted her role following the coronation of King Charles III, palace insiders whispered about friction behind closed doors. Some staff members who had served during Queen Elizabeth II's reign struggled to adjust to Camilla's different management style and expectations. Anne paused in the grand hallway, checking her watch with characteristic efficiency. Her first engagement was scheduled for 10:30, giving her just enough time to review briefing papers and ensure her appearance was immaculate. She had learned long ago that royal duties were a performance, and every detail mattered. From the angle of her hat to the choice of brooch, everything conveyed meaning to those who knew how to read the subtle language of royal protocol. Sarah Thompson approached with a leather portfolio containing the day's briefings. "Your Royal Highness, the Children's Hospital is expecting you at 10:30 sharp. The new wing dedication will take approximately 45 minutes, followed by a walkabout in the main ward." Anne nodded, already mentally preparing for the interactions ahead. She genuinely enjoyed meeting people, especially children and healthcare workers. These encounters reminded her why royal service mattered. When she visited a hospital or opened a school, she wasn't just cutting ribbons or making small talk. She was shining a spotlight on important work, raising morale, and demonstrating that the royal family cared about ordinary people's lives. Sergeant Morrison observed the morning routine with professional interest. His job was to anticipate potential security risks, but over the years, he had also become skilled at reading the subtle dynamics within the royal family. Today, he sensed an undercurrent of tension that had nothing to do with external threats. The sound of heels clicking on marble announced another arrival. Queen Camilla appeared at the far end of the corridor, accompanied by her own retinue of staff and security personnel. She moved with the confidence of someone who had finally claimed her rightful place after years of waiting in the shadows. The transformation from the vilified other woman to Queen of England had been remarkable, but it had also created new challenges within the royal hierarchy. Camilla's approach to her role differed significantly from that of her late mother-in-law, Queen Elizabeth II. Where Elizabeth had maintained emotional distance and relied on tradition, Camilla preferred a more hands-on approach. She involved herself in staff decisions, questioned long-established protocols, and wasn't afraid to express her opinions on family matters. Some appreciated her directness, while others found it disruptive to the palace's carefully maintained equilibrium. Anne and Camilla's relationship had always been complex. They shared similar ages and had both experienced public scrutiny regarding their personal lives. However, their approaches to royal duty couldn't have been more different. Anne believed in keeping her head down and working hard, while Camilla seemed more interested in reshaping the monarchy to suit modern expectations. The two women's paths converged near the palace's main staircase. Protocol demanded acknowledgement, and both women understood the delicate dance of royal hierarchy. Anne's curtsy was technically correct but notably brief. Camilla's responding nod carried just a hint of studied casualness that spoke volumes to those trained in reading royal body language. "Good morning, Anne," Camilla said, her voice carrying the confidence of her elevated status. "I understand you have quite a busy day ahead."
"Indeed, ma'am," Anne replied, using the formal address that protocol required.
The children's hospital opening should be particularly meaningful. They've done remarkable work expanding their cardiac unit. Camilla smiled, but Sergeant Morrison noticed it didn't quite reach her eyes. How wonderful. Charles and I were just discussing the importance of royal patronages. We feel it's time to review which engagements truly serve the Crown's interests. The words hung in the air like a challenge. Anne's expression remained neutral, but those who knew her well could detect the slight tightening around her eyes that signaled her displeasure. She had been patron of the Children's Hospital for over 20 years, and her support had helped raise millions of pounds for life-saving equipment and research. Sarah Thompson stepped forward diplomatically. "Your Royal Highness, we should be departing soon to maintain the schedule." Anne nodded gratefully at the interruption. "Of course. Good day, ma'am." She moved toward the exit with purposeful strides, her small entourage falling into step behind her. Sergeant Morrison followed at the prescribed distance, his mind already shifting to security protocols for the hospital visit. However, he couldn't shake the feeling that something significant had just occurred. The exchange between the two royal women had been polite on the surface, but the undercurrents suggested deeper tensions. As they stepped outside into the crisp March air, Anne paused to breathe deeply. The weight of royal responsibility never left her shoulders, but moments like these reminded her why she had dedicated her life to service. Each engagement was an opportunity to make a difference, to show that the monarchy remained relevant and caring in the 21st century. The Range Rover's engine purred to life as Anne settled into her seat. Through the bulletproof glass, she watched the palace recede behind them. Within those ancient walls, power struggles and personality conflicts played out daily. But once she left the building, her focus shifted entirely to the people she would meet and the causes she would champion. Sergeant Morrison took his position in the front passenger seat, radio crackling with updates from the advanced security team already in position at the hospital. His role was to ensure the Princess Royal's safety, but over the years he had come to understand that his job extended beyond physical protection. He was also safeguarding the dignity and effectiveness of the monarchy itself. The drive through London's morning traffic provided a brief respite from palace politics. Anne used the time to review her briefing papers, memorizing names and details that would help her connect with the people she was about to meet. This preparation was crucial to her success as a working royal. When she spoke with a young patient or thanked a dedicated nurse, her words carried weight because they were informed and genuine. As they approached the children's hospital, crowds had already begun gathering behind barriers. Despite decades of public service, Anne still felt a flutter of nervous energy before each engagement. The responsibility of representing the crown never became routine, and she wouldn't want it to. The day she stopped caring about doing her job well would be the day she should step aside. The hospital's chief executive, Dr. Margaret Chen, waited at the main entrance with barely contained excitement. This wasn't just a ceremonial visit for her. It was the culmination of years of fundraising and planning. The new cardiac wing would save hundreds of young lives, and having Princess Anne officially open it would help secure ongoing public support and donations. Anne's car door opened, and she stepped onto the red carpet with practiced grace. The cameras flashed, capturing her warm smile as she greeted Dr. Ketzor. Chen and the assembled hospital board members, this was the public face of monarchy, dignified, approachable, and genuinely interested in the work being done. What the cameras couldn't capture was the complex web of relationships and rivalries back at the palace, where Queen Camilla was already planning her next move to assert her authority over royal family dynamics. The morning's brief encounter had been just the opening gambit in what promised to be a much larger conflict over the future direction of the monarchy. Sergeant Morrison maintained his professional vigilance while observing the Princess Royal work the crowd with effortless skill. She had a gift for making each person feel seen and valued, whether they were a prominent donor or a young volunteer. This natural ability to connect with people was perhaps her greatest asset as a working royal, and it was something that couldn't be taught or manufactured. As Anne moved through the hospital corridors, meeting patients and staff, she embodied the best traditions of royal service. Her presence brought hope to sick children, recognition to dedicated healthcare workers, and media attention to important medical advances. This was the monarchy at its most effective, using privilege and platform to shine light on worthy causes and inspire public support. Meanwhile, back at Buckingham Palace, Queen Camilla was meeting with her private secretary to discuss upcoming royal engagements and family protocols. The conversation would soon turn to concerns about certain family members' high public profiles and whether adjustments needed to be made to ensure proper hierarchy was maintained. The seeds of conflict had been planted in that brief morning encounter, and like all palace dramas, what happened next would be determined by personality, protocol, and the delicate balance of power within one of the world's most scrutinized families. Anne's commitment to duty would soon be tested in ways she had never imagined, while Sergeant Morrison would find his loyalty and professionalism challenged by circumstances beyond his control. The royal game was about to begin in earnest, with the monarchy's future reputation hanging in the balance. The children's hospital visit had gone flawlessly. Princess Anne's natural warmth with young patients and genuine interest in medical advances had created exactly the positive headlines the monarchy needed. Dr. Chen beamed as she watched the Princess Royal cut the ribbon for the new cardiac wing, knowing that this royal endorsement would help secure funding for years to come. Sergeant Morrison felt the familiar satisfaction of a successful engagement as he coordinated Anne's departure. The crowds had been enthusiastic but well-behaved. Security protocols had functioned smoothly, and the Princess Royal had once again demonstrated why she was considered the most effective working member of the royal family. However, his radio crackled with an unexpected message that made his blood run cold. Delta 7, this is Palace Control. Return to base immediately after current engagement. Priority 1 protocols in effect. Priority 1 meant only one thing: a significant security or protocol breach that required immediate attention from senior protection officers. Morrison had heard that designation used only twice in his 23-year career, and both times had involved serious threats to royal family members. His mind raced through possibilities as he helped coordinate Anne's smooth exit from the hospital. The Princess Royal settled into her car with characteristic efficiency, already reviewing briefing papers for her next engagement. She noticed Morrison's tension immediately. Years of working together had taught her to read his moods and trust his professional judgment. "Everything all right, Sergeant?" she asked quietly, mindful of the other passengers in the vehicle. "Slight change of plans, ma'am. We need to return to the palace briefly before proceeding to your next engagement," Morrison replied, keeping his voice neutral while his mind worked through various scenarios. Anne nodded without further question. She had learned long ago that when security personnel used certain tones of voice, it was best to follow their guidance without debate. The British royal family faced constant threats from various sources, and protection officers like Morrison were trained to handle situations that most people couldn't imagine. The drive back to Buckingham Palace took longer than usual due to increased traffic, giving Morrison time to consider what might have prompted the Priority 1 alert. His secure radio remained ominously silent, offering no additional details about the nature of the emergency. Experience had taught him that palace crises often involved family dynamics rather than external security threats, but the formal protocol suggested something more serious. As their Range Rover approached the palace gates, Morrison noticed an unusual number of senior staff vehicles in the courtyard. The private secretary to the king was present, along with the Lord Chamberlain and several other high-ranking officials who typically only appeared during major ceremonial events or family emergencies. Whatever had happened was significant enough to warrant assembling the palace's senior management team. Anne stepped from the vehicle with her usual composure, but Morrison caught the slight tightening around her eyes that indicated concern. She had served the monarchy long enough to recognize when something was seriously amiss. The presence of so many senior officials in the middle of a working day suggested a crisis that went beyond routine palace business. "Your Royal Highness?" came a familiar voice from across the courtyard. Sir Edward Whitfield, the king's private secretary, approached with the measured steps of someone delivering unpleasant news. His expression was carefully neutral, but Anne had known him for over a decade and could read the stress in his posture. "Sir Edward," she replied with equal formality. "I understand there's been some sort of development requiring immediate attention." The private secretary glanced meaningfully at the gathered staff and security personnel before responding. "Indeed, ma'am. Perhaps we might discuss the matter privately in the blue drawing room." This was palace speak for a conversation too sensitive for public areas. Anne nodded and followed Sir Edward through corridors she had walked thousands of times, but which now felt charged with tension. Sergeant Morrison fell into step behind them, his hand instinctively moving closer to his radio as he scanned for any signs of unusual activity. The blue drawing room had witnessed countless private royal conversations over the centuries, from treaty negotiations to family disputes. Its elegant furnishings and historical portraits provided a dignified backdrop for even the most difficult discussions. Anne took her usual seat in a high-backed chair that had been used by royal family members for generations, while Sir Edward remained standing in a gesture that emphasized the formal nature of their meeting. "Ma'am, I'm afraid there's been an incident involving Her Majesty Queen Camilla and certain protocols regarding your upcoming engagements," Sir Edward began, choosing his words with diplomatic precision. Anne's expression remained neutral, but Morrison noticed her hands clasping slightly tighter in her lap. She had suspected this conversation was coming ever since the morning's encounter with Camilla. The new queen's apparent interest in reviewing royal patronages had been more than casual conversation. "I see," Anne replied calmly. "And what specific protocols are under discussion?" Sir Edward consulted his notes with obvious reluctance. "Her Majesty has expressed concerns about the current distribution of high-profile engagements among family members. She feels that as queen, she should take the lead role in certain charitable patronages that have traditionally been distributed among other working royals." The diplomatic language couldn't disguise what was really being discussed. Queen Camilla was making a power play, attempting to consolidate control over the royal family's most prestigious public roles. This wasn't about efficiency or modernizing the monarchy. It was about establishing dominance within the family hierarchy. Morrison found himself in the uncomfortable position of overhearing a conversation that revealed deep fractures within the royal family. His training emphasized discretion and loyalty, but he couldn't ignore the implications of what he was witnessing. If senior royals were fighting among themselves, it could affect security protocols and public scheduling in ways that impacted his ability to protect Princess Anne. "Specifically, ma'am, Her Majesty has suggested that your patronage of the Children's Hospital Foundation might be transferred to her direct oversight," Sir Edward continued, his discomfort with the message evident despite his professional demeanor. Anne's reaction was immediate, but controlled. The slight widening of her eyes and straightening of her shoulders signaled outrage that years of royal training kept from becoming verbal. The Children's Hospital Foundation had been her passion project for over 2 decades. She had personally raised millions of pounds, championed groundbreaking research, and maintained relationships with families who had benefited from the hospital's work. "I see," she said again, but this time her voice carried an edge that Morrison had rarely heard. "And has His Majesty been consulted about these proposed changes to long-established patronages?" The question hit at the heart of palace politics. King Charles III had to balance his role as monarch with his position as husband, and conflicts between his wife and sister put him in an impossible position. Sir Edward's hesitation before answering told Anne everything she needed to know about where her brother's loyalties currently lay. "His Majesty is aware of Her Majesty's concerns and is giving them serious consideration," came the carefully worded reply. Morrison felt his jaw clench involuntarily. In his years of service, he had developed genuine respect for Princess Anne's dedication to her charitable work. The idea that decades of relationship building and expertise could be casually transferred to serve someone else's political ambitions struck him as fundamentally wrong. However, his role as a protection officer meant keeping such opinions to himself. Anne rose from her chair with characteristic dignity, smoothing her skirt as she prepared to respond. The movement was deliberate and controlled, giving her time to formulate a reply that would be both diplomatic and firm. Years of navigating palace politics had taught her that some battles needed to be fought strategically rather than emotionally. "Sir Edward, please convey to their Majesties that I am, naturally, at the service of the Crown in whatever capacity is deemed most appropriate," she began, her voice steady despite the evident tension. "However, I would hope that any changes to long-established patronages would take into account the relationships and commitments that have been built over many years of dedicated service." The response was masterful, technically respectful, while making clear her strong opposition to the proposed changes. She was reminding everyone involved that royal patronages weren't just ceremonial positions, but represented real relationships with real people who depended on royal support and attention.
"Of course, ma'am. I will convey your sentiments accurately," Sir Edward replied, visibly relieved that the conversation hadn't escalated into open conflict.
As Anne prepared to leave for her next engagement, Morrison couldn't help but admire her grace under pressure. Lesser people might have exploded with anger or resorted to personal attacks, but she had maintained her dignity while making her position absolutely clear.
This was leadership in action, the kind of quiet strength that had made her one of the most respected members of the royal family. The walk back through the palace corridors felt different now. The morning's routine had been shattered by the revelation that family dynamics were shifting in ways that could fundamentally alter Anne's role and effectiveness as a working royal. Morrison found himself looking at familiar paintings and furnishings, while wondering how much longer this particular arrangement of royal responsibilities would continue. Anne's next engagement was a Veterans Support Charity Luncheon, an event she had attended annually for 15 years. As they prepared to depart the palace, Morrison noticed increased security presence around the building. Whether this was related to the morning's political tensions or some external threat remained unclear, but it added another layer of complexity to an already challenging day. The Princess Royal settled into her car with typical efficiency, but Morrison caught her stealing a glance back at the palace windows. Somewhere behind those ancient walls, conversations were taking place that would determine her future role in the monarchy. She had served faithfully for over 5 decades. The irony wasn't lost on him that while she was out representing the crown with distinction, others were plotting to diminish her influence and authority. As they drove through London's busy streets toward the Veterans Luncheon, Anne finally spoke. "Sergeant Morrison, in your experience, how important is continuity in royal patronages?" The question caught him off guard, but he recognized it as more than casual conversation. She was asking for his professional opinion about the effectiveness of royal engagements, and his answer might influence how she chose to respond to the morning's developments. "In my opinion, ma'am, the personal relationships and institutional knowledge built over years of service are invaluable," he replied carefully. "The people we visit and the organizations we support come to trust specific royals. That trust takes time to build and can be easily damaged by sudden changes." Anne nodded thoughtfully, filing away his response for future consideration. She valued the perspectives of long-serving staff members who observed royal engagements from a different vantage point than family members or senior administrators. Morrison's view that continuity mattered would factor into whatever strategy she developed for responding to Camilla's power play. The Veterans Luncheon venue came into sight, with its familiar crowds of elderly men and women who had served their country in various conflicts. These events always energized Anne because they connected her directly with people whose sacrifices had preserved the freedom and democracy that made constitutional monarchy possible. The irony that she might be forced to abandon such meaningful work due to family politics wasn't lost on her. Morrison began coordinating with the advanced security team as their vehicle approached the venue. His radio chattered with routine updates about crowd control and access points, but underneath the professional calm, he sensed that this day marked a turning point. The morning's revelations had exposed fractures in the royal family that could have far-reaching consequences for everyone involved. As Anne stepped from her car to greet the Veterans Organization leadership, she embodied the best traditions of royal service. Her genuine warmth and evident respect for military service created an immediate connection with the assembled crowd. This was exactly the kind of engagement that justified the monarchy's continued existence, using privilege and platform to honor those who had served and sacrificed for their country. But even as she smiled and shook hands with decorated veterans, Anne's mind was already working on strategies for protecting the charitable relationships she had spent decades building. The battle for her royal role was just beginning, and she had no intention of surrendering without a fight. The veterans she was honoring had taught her that some things were worth defending, regardless of the personal cost. The veterans' luncheon had concluded with Princess Anne's characteristic blend of warmth and dignity. She had listened attentively to war stories, admired medal collections, and personally thanked every volunteer who helped maintain the organization's vital work. However, as her Range Rover pulled away from the venue, Sergeant Morrison noticed unusual activity on his secure radio channel. Delta 7, be advised that Palace Control requires your immediate return. Package Blue is requesting emergency consultation, came the coded message that made Morrison's stomach tighten. Package Blue was the designation for King Charles III, and emergency consultations were reserved for the most serious family crises. Princess Anne caught the tension in Morrison's posture immediately. Years of working together had created an almost telepathic understanding between the royal and her protection officer. She could read stress in his shoulders, concern in the way he adjusted his earpiece, and urgency in his slight forward lean toward the radio. "The palace again?" she asked quietly, not wanting to alarm her lady-in-waiting, Sarah Thompson, who was reviewing the afternoon schedule in the seat beside her. "Yes, ma'am. His Majesty has requested your immediate attendance," Morrison replied, already redirecting their driver toward Buckingham Palace while calculating revised security protocols for the unexpected route change. The return journey gave Anne time to prepare mentally for what she suspected would be a difficult conversation with her brother. Charles had always been caught between competing loyalties, his duties as king, his relationship with Camilla, and his bonds with his siblings. The morning's developments regarding royal patronages had clearly escalated beyond Sir Edward Whitfield's diplomatic intervention. As their vehicle approached the palace gates, Morrison noticed an unusual gathering of official cars in the private courtyard. The Archbishop of Canterbury's distinctive Bentley sat alongside vehicles belonging to the Prime Minister's private secretary and several senior courtiers. This level of high-ranking attendance suggested that the morning's family dispute had evolved into a constitutional crisis. "Sarah, I suspect this meeting may run longer than anticipated," Anne informed her lady-in-waiting as they entered the palace. "Please reschedule this afternoon's engagements accordingly and ensure appropriate apologies are sent to the affected organizations." 20 years of serving Princess Anne had taught her to anticipate schedule disruptions and manage them with minimal fuss. However, the unusual tension in the palace atmosphere and the presence of so many senior officials suggested this particular disruption was far more significant than routine family business. Sergeant Morrison accompanied Anne through corridors that seemed heavier with history today. The portraits of previous monarchs looked down with what felt like judgment as they passed, and the usual bustle of palace staff had been replaced by an almost ecclesiastical quiet that suggested serious deliberations were taking place. They were directed not to one of the usual meeting rooms, but to the throne room itself, a choice of venue that emphasized the constitutional rather than personal nature of whatever discussion was about to unfold. The room's grandeur, with its red silk damask walls and ornate gilded furniture, had witnessed countless moments of royal drama over the centuries, but few as potentially damaging as what was about to occur. King Charles III stood near the throne, his usually warm demeanor replaced by the formal bearing he adopted during the most serious royal business. Queen Camilla was positioned slightly to his left, her confident posture and direct gaze suggesting she felt this confrontation was long overdue. The Archbishop of Canterbury and the Lord Chamberlain flanked them, providing both religious and constitutional authority to the proceedings. Anne entered with the measured dignity she had perfected over 5 decades of public service. Her curtsy to the king was technically perfect, but notably brief, while her acknowledgement of Queen Camilla carried just enough formality to border on coolness. The subtle choreography of royal greetings conveyed more about family dynamics than any words could express. Morrison took his position near the door, officially to provide security but practically to witness whatever historic moment was about to unfold. His years of service had taught him that some conversations would be referenced and analyzed for decades to come, and accurate recollection of what transpired could become crucial for future palace operations. "Anne," Charles began, his voice carrying the weight of both brotherly affection and monarchical authority. "Thank you for returning so promptly. I'm afraid we have a situation that requires immediate resolution." The formal language confirmed Anne's suspicions that this had moved well beyond family disagreement into official royal business. When the king referred to situations requiring resolution, it typically meant that constitutional advisors had been consulted
and formal positions had been established. Queen Camilla stepped forward slightly, her movement subtle but clearly calculated to emphasize her role in the proceedings. "Anne, I hope you understand that the changes we discussed this morning are necessary for the effective functioning of the modern monarchy. The public expects clarity about who speaks for the crown on various issues." The statement was diplomatically phrased but fundamentally flawed in its assumptions. Anne had spent decades building relationships with charitable organizations precisely because the monarchy's effectiveness depended on personal connections and institutional trust. The idea that royal patronages could be shuffled like corporate portfolios demonstrated a fundamental misunderstanding of how constitutional monarchy actually worked. "Camilla," Anne replied, using the Queen's first name in a subtle breach of protocol that emphasized their equal status as King's family members, "I've served these organizations faithfully for over 20 years. The relationships I've built cannot be simply transferred like corporate assets. These charities depend on continuity and personal commitment." The Archbishop of Canterbury shifted uncomfortably, recognizing that he was witnessing a family argument disguised as constitutional debate. His presence was meant to provide moral authority to whatever decisions were reached, but the personal animosity between the two women made finding common ground increasingly difficult. Morrison observed the exchange with professional interest, noting how each participant's body language revealed their true feelings, despite diplomatic language. King Charles appeared torn between competing loyalties, frequently glancing between his wife and sister as if hoping someone else would find a solution. Queen Camilla's confident posture suggested she believed her position as queen gave her ultimate authority over family decisions. Princess Anne's rigid composure indicated barely controlled anger at having her life's work dismissed so casually. "The monarchy must evolve with the times," Camilla continued, her tone becoming more assertive. "Having multiple family members competing for attention in the same charitable spheres confuses the public and dilutes our message. Consolidation under my leadership would provide clearer direction and more effective coordination." The argument revealed Camilla's fundamental misunderstanding of royal patronages. They weren't corporate holdings to be managed for efficiency, but personal commitments that reflected individual royals' genuine interests and expertise. Anne's work with children's hospitals drew on her experience as a mother and her genuine affection for young people. Transferring that relationship to someone else would destroy decades of carefully built trust and effectiveness. Anne's response was measured but firm. "The organizations I patronize didn't choose me for administrative convenience. They chose me because of my personal commitment to their work and my ability to champion their causes effectively. That cannot be replicated through bureaucratic reorganization." King Charles finally intervened, his voice carrying the weight of final authority. "Both perspectives have merit," he began diplomatically, "but we must find a solution that serves the crown's interests while respecting the valuable work already being done." Morrison could see the strain this situation was placing on the king. Charles had waited decades to assume the throne, only to find himself immediately embroiled in family conflicts that threatened to damage the monarchy's reputation. His attempt to find middle ground satisfied no one while highlighting his inability to control the women in his family. The Lord Chamberlain, who had remained silent throughout the exchange, finally spoke. "Your Majesty, might I suggest that any changes to long-established patronages be implemented gradually, with appropriate transition periods to maintain organizational stability?" The suggestion was sensible from an administrative perspective, but it missed the emotional heart of the conflict. This wasn't really about charitable efficiency. It was about power, recognition, and Queen Camilla's determination to establish herself as the dominant figure in royal family dynamics. "I appreciate the Lord Chamberlain's suggestion," Anne replied carefully, "but I would hope that any decisions take into account the preferences of the organizations involved. Surely they should have some voice in choosing their royal patron?" The proposal was clever, shifting the discussion from palace politics to organizational autonomy. If charities could express preferences about their royal patronage, many would likely choose to maintain existing relationships rather than starting over with someone new. However, it also challenged royal prerogative in ways that made constitutional advisors uncomfortable. Queen Camilla's expression tightened at Anne's tactical maneuver. "The choice of royal patrons has always been a crown prerogative. We cannot allow individual organizations to dictate royal family responsibilities.
The statement revealed Camilla's authoritarian instincts and her misunderstanding of modern constitutional monarchy. While technically the crown could assign patronages arbitrarily, effective royal service required mutual respect and cooperation between royals and the organizations they supported. Attempting to impose unwanted patrons would likely result in organizational rebellion and public criticism. Morrison found himself impressed by Princess Anne's strategic thinking. She was using constitutional principles and practical considerations to counter what was essentially a personal power grab disguised as modernization. Her decades of experience in royal service provided her with arguments that were difficult to refute without appearing autocratic or out of touch. The Archbishop of Canterbury attempted to restore some spiritual dimension to the discussion. Perhaps we might consider what serves not just the crown's interests, but the greater good of the charitable work being done. Surely that should be our primary concern. His intervention highlighted the moral dimensions of the conflict. Royal patronages weren't just about family prestige or organizational efficiency. They were about supporting vital work that improved people's lives. Disrupting effective charitable relationships for political reasons seemed to contradict the monarchy's fundamental purpose of serving the nation. Anne seized on the Archbishop's comment. Precisely. The children's hospital I visited this morning has saved hundreds of young lives with equipment purchased through funds raised during my patronage. That work continues because of the relationships and trust built over many years. Such achievements cannot be replicated through administrative decree. The specific example was powerful because it connected abstract arguments about patronages to concrete results that everyone could understand. Anne wasn't defending her position out of vanity or stubbornness. She was protecting charitable work that had measurable impacts on people's lives. King Charles appeared increasingly uncomfortable with the direction of the conversation. His attempt to balance competing family demands was exposing weaknesses in his leadership and decision-making abilities. The public perception of royal family unity, so crucial to monarchical effectiveness, was being damaged by this very public display of internal conflict. Perhaps, he suggested tentatively, we might adjourn this discussion to allow everyone time to consider various options and their implications. The suggestion was reasonable, but revealed his inability to make difficult decisions when they involved family relationships. Strong monarchs throughout history had been willing to subordinate personal feelings to constitutional necessities, but Charles seemed paralyzed by competing loyalties. Queen Camilla's reaction to the proposed delay was swift and negative. Charles, we've already discussed this matter extensively. Further delay only prolongs uncertainty and prevents necessary modernization of royal operations. Her use of the king's first name in such a formal setting was a calculated reminder of her intimate influence over his decisions. However, it also highlighted the uncomfortable reality that personal relationships were driving constitutional changes rather than careful consideration of what best served the monarchy and the nation. Morrison observed the family dynamics with growing concern. His job was to protect Princess Anne physically, but he was witnessing threats to her position and effectiveness that no amount of personal security could address. The morning's developments suggested that palace politics were becoming more important than public service, a shift that could undermine everything the modern monarchy claimed to represent. The tension in the throne room had reached a breaking point. Princess Anne stood her ground with quiet dignity, while Queen Camilla's frustration became increasingly evident despite her attempts to maintain royal composure. King Charles appeared caught between his constitutional duties and his personal relationships, unable to make the decisive intervention that the situation clearly required. Sergeant Morrison noticed subtle changes in the room's atmosphere that his security training had taught him to recognize. The Archbishop of Canterbury's repeated glances toward the door suggested he was considering a diplomatic exit from what was becoming an increasingly uncomfortable family confrontation. The Lord Chamberlain's rigid posture indicated his growing concern about constitutional implications of the dispute. Your Majesty, Anne addressed her brother directly, bypassing Queen Camilla's attempts to control the conversation. I would like to propose a compromise that might address everyone's concerns while preserving the effectiveness of existing charitable relationships. Charles looked up hopefully, eager for any solution that might resolve the conflict without requiring him to choose sides definitively. Queen Camilla's expression tightened, recognizing that Anne was about to outmaneuver her politically while maintaining the appearance of cooperation and reasonableness. I suggest that we establish a formal review process for all royal patronages. Anne continued, her voice steady and diplomatic. This review would involve the charitable organizations themselves, constitutional experts, and family members. Any changes would be implemented only after careful consideration of their impact on the organization's effectiveness and public service. The proposal was masterful in its political sophistication. It appeared to address Camilla's concerns about modernizing royal operations while protecting Anne's existing relationships. More importantly, it shifted decision-making from personal preference to institutional process, making it much harder for arbitrary changes to be imposed. Morrison found himself admiring Princess Anne's tactical brilliance. She was using constitutional principles and democratic processes to counter what was essentially an authoritarian power grab. The proposal would likely result in maintaining the status quo, since most charitable organizations would prefer continuing with familiar patrons rather than starting over with newcomers. Queen Camilla recognized the trap immediately. That seems unnecessarily complicated for what should be straightforward administrative decisions, she replied, her diplomatic mask beginning to slip. The king and I are perfectly capable of determining what serves the crown's best interests. The response revealed Camilla's fundamental misunderstanding of constitutional monarchy. While the crown retained theoretical authority over patronages, exercising that power arbitrarily would trigger exactly the kind of institutional resistance and public criticism that modern monarchs worked hard to avoid. The Archbishop of Canterbury seized the opportunity to support Anne's reasonable proposal. The Princess Royal's suggestion has considerable merit. Involving the organizations themselves in any review process would demonstrate the Crown's commitment to serving, rather than dictating to the charitable sector. His intervention carried significant weight because of his moral authority and constitutional position. The Church of England's support for gradual consultative change over arbitrary decree would influence public opinion and make it harder for Camilla to push through her preferred approach. King Charles appeared relieved to have a face-saving option that might resolve the conflict without forcing him to explicitly side against either his wife or his sister. Anne's proposal seems worthy of serious consideration. Perhaps Sir Edward could prepare a detailed framework for such a review process. The suggestion effectively tabled the immediate dispute while providing time for cooler heads to prevail. However, it also revealed Charles's weakness as a leader, since strong monarchs would have made clear decisions rather than delegating difficult choices to administrative processes. Queen Camilla's displeasure was evident, despite her attempts to maintain royal dignity. Of course, Charles. Though I hope we don't allow bureaucratic procedures to prevent necessary modernization indefinitely. Her response was technically acquiescent, but clearly indicated that she viewed this as a temporary setback rather than a permanent resolution. The battle over royal family hierarchy and charitable patronages was far from over. It had simply moved to a different battlefield. Morrison observed the careful choreography of royal diplomacy with professional interest. Each participant was positioning themselves for future conflicts while maintaining the appearance of family unity that public perception required. However, the underlying tensions were too deep to be resolved by procedural compromises. As the meeting began to conclude, Anne made one final strategic move. I'm grateful for this opportunity to discuss these important issues. I hope that throughout any review process, we'll remember that our primary obligation is to the people and organizations we serve, rather than to our own preferences or convenience. The statement was diplomatically phrased but carried a clear message. Royal service was about putting public good before personal ambition. It was a not-so-subtle criticism of Camilla's motives while positioning Anne as the defender of traditional royal values and charitable effectiveness. The Archbishop of Canterbury nodded approvingly at Anne's words, recognizing both their moral authority and their political effectiveness. Indeed, service to others has always been the monarchy's highest calling. Any changes to established patterns should be guided by that principle. King Charles appeared eager to end the meeting before further damage could be done to family relationships. Thank you all for this thoughtful discussion. I believe we have a path forward that serves everyone's interests appropriately. His summary was optimistically diplomatic but ignored the fundamental disagreements that remained unresolved. Queen Camilla's determination to consolidate royal authority under her control hadn't changed, and Princess Anne's commitment to protecting her charitable relationships remained equally firm. As the formal meeting concluded, Morrison prepared to escort Princess Anne back to her postponed engagements. However, he noticed Queen Camilla approaching for what appeared to be a private word with the Princess Royal. The encounter promised to be more revealing than the formal discussions that had just concluded. "Anne," Camilla began, her voice carrying a mixture of frustration and calculation, "I hope you understand that my suggestions come from a genuine desire to strengthen the monarchy's effectiveness, not from any personal animosity toward your work." The statement was carefully crafted to appear conciliatory while establishing Camilla's authority to make such suggestions. However, it also revealed her awareness that the conflict was being interpreted as a personal power struggle rather than institutional reform. Anne's response was equally measured, but more direct. "Camilla, I appreciate your concerns about effectiveness. However, effectiveness in royal service comes from genuine commitment and long-term relationships, not from organizational charts or administrative efficiency." The exchange highlighted the fundamental philosophical differences between the two women. Camilla approached royal duties like a corporate restructuring, focusing on hierarchy and control. Anne understood that royal effectiveness came from personal authenticity and genuine service to others. Morrison found himself caught between his professional obligations and his personal convictions. His duty required maintaining strict neutrality in family disputes, but his years of observing Princess Anne's charitable work made it difficult to remain entirely objective about proposals that might undermine her effectiveness. "Perhaps we might continue this conversation at a more appropriate time," Anne suggested diplomatically, recognizing that private arguments in the throne room were inappropriate regardless of their content. "I'm sure we both have pressing engagements that require our attention." The suggestion was tactfully phrased, but effectively ended the conversation before it could escalate into open conflict. Anne had learned over decades of royal service that some battles were better fought through actions than words, and that maintaining dignity was often more important than scoring immediate victories. As they prepared to leave the palace, Sarah Thompson approached with the revised afternoon schedule. The morning's disruptions had created a cascade of changes that would require careful coordination to minimize inconvenience to the organizations expecting royal visits. "Ma'am, I've managed to reschedule most of this afternoon's commitments," Sarah reported efficiently. "The Youth Development Center can accommodate a later arrival, and the university ceremony has been moved to allow for your attendance despite the delay." Anne nodded gratefully at her lady-in-waiting's competence. The ability to manage complex schedules and diplomatic relationships was crucial to effective royal service, and Sarah's experience made even crisis situations manageable. Morrison coordinated with his security team as they prepared to resume the afternoon's program. The morning's revelations about palace politics added new layers of complexity to his protection responsibilities. He now understood that threats to Princess Anne's safety might come from within the royal family structure, as much as from external sources. The drive to the Youth Development Center provided a brief respite from palace intrigue. Anne used the time to refocus on the afternoon's engagements, preparing herself mentally to represent the crown with appropriate dignity, despite the morning's personal attacks on her work and reputation. "Sergeant Morrison," she said quietly, "in your professional opinion, how important is it for royal protection officers to maintain strict neutrality in family disputes?" The question caught him off guard, but clearly sought his guidance on navigating the complex situation they all faced. His answer would help determine how palace staff should respond to escalating conflicts between senior royals. "Ma'am, neutrality is essential for operational effectiveness," he replied carefully. "However, our ultimate loyalty must be to the crown and the constitutional principles it represents, rather than to individual personalities or their political preferences." Anne nodded thoughtfully at his response, filing away his perspective for future reference. Morrison had essentially told her that professional staff would support whoever best served the monarchy's long-term interests, rather than whoever held the most immediate power. The Youth Development Center came into sight, with crowds of young people and community leaders gathering to welcome the Princess Royal. These engagements always energized Anne, because they connected her directly with the future generation that constitutional monarchy must serve and inspire. As her car door opened and Anne stepped onto the red carpet with practiced grace, Morrison marveled at her ability to compartmentalize personal stress and focus entirely on public service. The morning's palace politics disappeared as she greeted enthusiastic teenagers and dedicated youth workers with genuine warmth and interest. This was royal service at its most effective. Using privilege and platform to encourage young people, recognize community achievements, and demonstrate that the monarchy cared about ordinary citizens' lives and aspirations. It was exactly the kind of work that Queen Camilla's proposed reorganization might disrupt or eliminate. Morrison maintained his professional vigilance while observing Princess Anne work the crowd with effortless skill. She had a remarkable ability to make each person feel valued and heard, whether they were prominent community leaders or shy teenagers meeting their first royal. This natural gift for human connection was perhaps her greatest asset as a working royal. However, even as Anne smiled and engaged with the crowd, Morrison knew that the morning's confrontation was just the beginning of a much larger conflict. Queen Camilla's determination to reshape royal family dynamics wouldn't be deterred by one procedural setback, and the battle for control over charitable patronages represented just one front in a broader war for influence within the monarchy. The afternoon's engagements would provide temporary refuge from palace politics, but the fundamental issues remained unresolved. Princess Anne's commitment to her charitable work would soon face even more serious challenges, while Sergeant Morrison would find his loyalty and professionalism tested in ways he had never anticipated. 3 weeks had passed since the confrontation in the throne room, but the underlying tensions within the royal family had only intensified. Princess Anne maintained her demanding schedule of public engagements while privately preparing for what she recognized would be a decisive battle over the future direction of the monarchy. Queen Camilla had been conspicuously absent from several family events, reportedly developing her own strategy for consolidating royal authority. Sergeant Morrison noticed the strain in subtle ways that years of close observation had taught him to recognize. Anne's morning briefings took slightly longer as she insisted on reviewing every detail of upcoming engagements. Her usual efficiency remained intact, but underneath lay a determination to demonstrate her continued effectiveness as a working royal, regardless of family politics. The morning's first engagement was particularly significant. The annual fundraising gala for the Children's Hospital Foundation, the charity that had become the symbolic center of the dispute over royal patronages. Anne had personally raised over £15 million for the organization during her 20-year patronage, funding crucial medical equipment and research programs that had saved countless young lives. Dr. Margaret Chen, the hospital's chief executive, had arrived early to ensure every detail was perfect. She understood that this event was about more than fundraising. It was Princess Anne's opportunity to demonstrate the irreplaceable value of her long-term commitment to the organization. The presence of major donors, media representatives, and government officials would make it a crucial test of public support. "Your Royal Highness, Dr." Chen greeted Anne with obvious relief as she arrived at the London Hotel ballroom where the gala was being held. "We're absolutely thrilled with the response. We've already exceeded our fundraising target, and several major donors specifically mentioned your personal involvement as their reason for increased giving." Anne smiled genuinely at the news, feeling vindicated in her belief that effective royal patronage required personal commitment and authentic relationships. "Dr. Chen, the work your team does is inspiring. It's my privilege to support such vital medical advances." Morrison observed the interaction with professional interest while scanning the ballroom for any security concerns. The event had attracted an impressive array of London's philanthropic community, including several individuals who wielded significant influence in charitable circles. Their obvious enthusiasm for Princess Anne's continued involvement would send a powerful message to palace officials monitoring the evening's success. The ballroom itself had been decorated with photographs showcasing the hospital's achievements over the past 2 decades. Many images featured Princess Anne visiting young patients, touring research facilities, and presenting awards to outstanding medical staff. The visual narrative made clear that her patronage wasn't ceremonial, but represented genuine engagement with the organization's mission and people. As guests mingled during the reception period, Morrison noticed several prominent figures approaching Princess Anne with expressions of concern and support. Word of the disputes over royal patronages had leaked into London's charitable community, creating anxiety about potential disruptions to long-established relationships between royals and their supported organizations. Lord Harrison, chairman of the Medical Research Council and a significant government advisor on healthcare policy, spoke privately with Anne near the ballroom's main entrance. "Your Royal Highness, I hope you know that the medical community holds your work in the highest regard. Any changes to your involvement with children's healthcare would be seen as a significant loss." His comment was diplomatically phrased but carried clear political weight. Government officials and medical leaders understood that Princess Anne's expertise and relationships were genuinely valuable assets that couldn't be easily replaced through administrative reorganization. Their support would influence any review process of royal patronages. Anne responded with characteristic grace while making her position subtly clear. Lord Harrison, my commitment to medical advancement, particularly in pediatric care, remains unwavering. I hope that commitment will continue to serve the nation's interests appropriately. The exchange was observed by several journalists covering the event, who recognized the subtext about ongoing disputes within the royal family. However, Anne's focus remained entirely on the charitable work, rather than palace politics, demonstrating the professional approach that had earned her widespread respect. As the formal program began, Morrison positioned himself to observe both the audience reaction and any potential security issues. The ballroom was filled to capacity with influential supporters who had paid substantial sums to attend, generating crucial funding for medical research and patient care. The financial success of the evening would provide concrete evidence of Princess Anne's continued effectiveness as a royal patron. Chen introduced the evening's program with obvious enthusiasm. Tonight we celebrate not just medical achievements, but the extraordinary partnership between our hospital and Her Royal Highness, Princess Anne. Over 20 years, this relationship has transformed children's healthcare in ways that would have been impossible without such dedicated royal support. The statement received enthusiastic applause from the assembled guests, many of whom had witnessed Anne's genuine engagement with the hospital's work over many years. Their response demonstrated the kind of authentic support that couldn't be manufactured through administrative decree or transferred to different royals without significant loss of effectiveness. As Anne rose to address the gathering, Morrison noticed the subtle shift in her demeanor that marked the transition from private person to public representative of the crown. Her posture straightened, her expression became more formal, but her voice retained the warmth that made her such an effective communicator with charitable audiences. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for your generous support of work that literally saves young lives every day. She began, her words carrying genuine emotion rather than formal politeness. The advances we celebrate tonight, from groundbreaking cardiac procedures to innovative cancer treatments, exist because people like you believe that every child deserves the best possible medical care. The speech was masterfully crafted to emphasize the concrete results of charitable giving while subtly reinforcing Anne's personal connection to the work. She spoke knowledgeably about specific medical advances, mentioned individual staff members by name, and shared stories that could only come from years of genuine involvement with the organization. Morrison observed the audience's reaction with professional interest. These were sophisticated people accustomed to polished presentations from various royals and celebrities, but their response to Anne's remarks was noticeably more engaged and authentic. She wasn't just reading prepared statements. She was sharing genuine knowledge and personal experiences that demonstrated real commitment to the cause. Over the past 20 years, I've had the privilege of meeting thousands of young patients, their families, and the dedicated medical professionals who care for them, Anne continued. Each encounter has reinforced my conviction that this work represents the monarchy at its best, using privilege and platform to serve others rather than ourselves. The comment was subtly political, contrasting genuine service with the self-serving motives that critics often attributed to royal activities. However, it was delivered with such sincerity that it felt like personal reflection rather than strategic messaging. As Anne concluded her remarks to sustained applause, Morrison noticed several significant developments in the ballroom. Major donors were approaching hospital staff to discuss increased giving, journalists were taking detailed notes about the evening's success, and government officials were making calls that suggested positive reports would reach Whitehall about Princess Anne's continued effectiveness. During the reception that followed, Morrison overheard numerous conversations that reinforced his growing understanding of the broader implications of the palace disputes. Charitable leaders expressed concern about potential disruptions to their royal relationships, while donors indicated that their continued support might depend on maintaining established patronage arrangements. Lady Pemberton, a prominent philanthropist whose family foundation had donated over £2 million to various royal charities, spoke directly with Anne about these concerns. Your Royal Highness, the charitable community is deeply worried about rumors of major changes to royal patronages. Many of us have developed our giving strategies around specific royal relationships, So Anne's response was carefully neutral but reassuring. Lady Pemberton, my commitment to the organizations I serve remains unchanged. I hope that any future developments will take into account the interests of the charities themselves rather than administrative convenience. The conversation was observed by several other major donors, who clearly found Anne's response more satisfactory than uncertainty about potential reorganization. Their body language and subsequent discussions suggested that they viewed her as the most reliable royal partner for their philanthropic activities. As the evening progressed, Morrison began receiving unusual radio communications from Palace Security Control. The messages were coded, but indicated that Queen Camilla was making unscheduled visits to several organizations that held royal patronages, apparently conducting her own assessment of potential changes to family responsibilities. Delta 7, be advised that Package Gold is conducting independent consultations regarding operational modifications, came the euphemistic message that Morrison immediately understood. Queen Camilla was visiting charities to evaluate potential patronage transfers, presumably without coordinating with existing royal patrons. Anne's reaction to the news, conveyed discreetly during a quiet moment between conversations, was immediate but controlled. I see. Well, I'm sure the organizations will provide honest assessments of their needs and preferences. Her response suggested confidence that charitable leaders would prefer maintaining existing relationships rather than starting over with someone new, regardless of that person's theoretical authority. However, Morrison could see the strain in her eyes as she contemplated the unprecedented challenge to her life's work. The gala concluded with announcements of record-breaking fundraising totals and enthusiastic praise for Princess Anne's continued leadership of the charitable effort. Dr. Fairy Chen's closing remarks emphasized the irreplaceable nature of the royal partnership that had made such achievements possible. Tonight's success demonstrates conclusively that effective charitable work requires genuine commitment, long-term relationships, and authentic expertise. Dr. Chen announced to sustained applause, "We are profoundly grateful for Princess Anne's 20 years of dedicated service and look forward to many more years of partnership." The statement was diplomatically worded, but clearly intended as a public endorsement of Anne's continued patronage. Coming from such a respected medical leader, it would carry significant weight in any official review of royal charitable responsibilities. As they prepared to leave the hotel, Morrison coordinated with his security team while processing the evening's political implications. Princess Anne had demonstrated her continued effectiveness and popularity within the charitable community, potentially strengthening her position in ongoing family disputes. However, Queen Camilla's parallel efforts to evaluate patronage opportunities suggested that the conflict was intensifying rather than resolving. The coming weeks would likely bring more direct confrontations as both women maneuvered for advantage in reshaping the monarchy's charitable relationships. "Sergeant Morrison," Anne said quietly as they settled into her car for the return journey to the palace, "in your professional assessment, how important is public support in resolving internal royal disputes?" The question revealed her strategic thinking about the broader battle she was fighting. Morrison's answer would help her understand whether popular acclaim could protect her against administrative or family pressure to surrender her charitable roles. "Ma'am, in my experience, public support is crucial for long-term royal effectiveness," he replied carefully. "The monarchy's legitimacy ultimately depends on public respect and affection, which makes it difficult to ignore widespread opposition to any particular changes." Anne nodded thoughtfully, clearly filing away his perspective for future strategic planning. The evening had provided strong evidence of public support for her charitable work, but whether that would be sufficient to protect against Queen Camilla's determination remained to be seen. As their car approached Buckingham Palace, Morrison noticed unusual activity in the private courtyard that suggested late-night meetings were taking place. The battle for control of royal charitable patronages was entering a new phase, with both sides preparing for what might be a final confrontation over the monarchy's future direction. The stakes were higher than personal preference or family dynamics. They involved fundamental questions about how constitutional monarchy should function in the modern world. Princess Anne's commitment to genuine service was being tested against Queen Camilla's vision of hierarchical control, with the outcome likely to influence royal operations for generations to come. Morrison prepared for whatever developments the following day might bring, knowing that his role protecting Princess Anne had evolved into something much more complex than traditional security duties. He was now safeguarding not just her physical safety, but her ability to continue the charitable work that had defined her royal service for over 5 decades.